So here we are creating this advanced technology that's going to reshape everything, and we're expecting the human just to come along quickly. But at the end of the day, replacing human expertise with machine intelligence is incredibly hard.
Welcome to another episode of Going Beyond the Title from Individual Contributor Leader. I'm your host, Mike Scarpone, and today's guest is Dr. Bryan Reimer, who's written a wonderful book that we're going to talk about, How to Make AI Useful, Moving Beyond the Hype to Real Progress in Business, Society, and Life. Yeah. So, Bryan, thanks for joining us. And first question off the bat is, how'd you get into this work?
It's a great question, Mike. In my academic studies, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at the gray hair, about 25 years ago, I actually did a tremendous amount of what we at this point look at as early generation work in AI, as part of efforts to really look at driver distraction related issues and logistics issues. And through the years, in various elements of my research, we have always used a variety of AI tools to begin to look at complex data systems. In more recent time, in the last decade or so, I've spent a lot of my effort focus on the intersection of public policy, technology, and human behavior as it relates to assisted and automated driving. And when you think about automated driving, it's really the world's most salient embodiment of AI has over the last few years, until the evolution of large language models and chatbots, been touching our lives. And quite frankly, it's still the most important and salient embodiment of AI in a safety-centric environment that's going to shape how we live and move for the near future. And I say safety-centric because the tolerances in the intersection of technology and behavior in a vehicle are at 70 miles an hour centimeters. So about 2 years ago, some of my colleagues in Sweden challenged me to think a little more about how I view the intersection of AI and human behavior moving forward. And it really triggered me to sit back and start thinking about, okay, where are we? Where are we heading? And this technology promise of AI and how that disconnects from the human. And as I said earlier, I study the intersection of policy, technology, and behavior. The human is often the lacking component. It takes us a long time to change. We're embedded in our ways, set in our ways, however you want to think about it. So here we are creating this advanced technology that's going to reshape everything, and we're expecting the human just to come along quickly. And we've been pursuing the context of just better AI. And it came to me as like, look, it's not about better AI at the end of the day. It's about building systems that are more reliable, more trustful, and that can support us more effectively. And really the whole context of human-centered engineering, which underlies a lot of my work, just applies more and more day by day, year by year to the trends in AI. Now, human-centered engineering doesn't necessarily make it easier to perfect algorithms and deploy them, but it begins to say it's all about us. It's not about evolving technology, evolving automation just for the sake of the technology. It's about starting to think about how does it impact how we live, move, in society at large.
One of the things that in the book that you point out pretty quickly is there are two schools of thought. One is that AI is the greatest thing to come along since sliced bread. And the other is just the opposite, that AI is going to take over the world and put us out of work. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, if we begin to focus the AI on supporting us, the goal isn't to replace work. It's about to augment work, replace the menial tasks, amplify our capabilities to perform the more complex. If we continue to focus on automate, yes, we are going to displace larger portions of the workforce with narrowly, and put narrowly in quotes, defined algorithms that do not leverage the incredible capacity of what we call the wet computer, the brain sitting between our two ears. We as humans and as the human species have an innate ability to operate in the gray.
Mm.
computational algorithms trained on data just don't work as effectively in the gray reasoning their way forward. Now, that's not to say better AI is not to come. It is.
Mm.
But at the end of the day, replacing human expertise with machine intelligence is incredibly hard. Fusing human expertise with machine intelligence can really get us an incredible amount of what we're looking for without all of the societal risks that come with massive displacement of the workforce, et cetera.
Mm. So let me read a couple things from your book. And by the way, I want to tell the listeners that I picked the book up and was expecting something very dry around AI. And this is a must read. It's a must read for folks because it really brings so many important concepts to the forefront on artificial intelligence and the impact that it's making in our world. So I can't recommend it enough. In the book, you indicate that there are three distinct phases unfolding before us: the wow, which I must admit I'm currently at, the whoa, which is the disruption, and the grow. And can you speak to each of those stages?
Yeah, Mike. So the wow is where some of society it remains today. Is, oh my God, what can these embodiments of AI, specifically chatbots, do for us? And chatbots are just one tool. Large language models that fuel these chatbots are just, again, an enabling tool in the quiver. Just one element of what we would think about is what AI is. AI is much broader, a tool set. So we are embodied in, oh my God, what can these things do for us? We ask them questions. They provide us incredible opinions back. They don't provide fact. They provide opinions based upon human expertise and all the training data they were provided. Much like an academic study, it takes correlated evidence or corresponding evidence or multiple studies that point to the same thing to begin to move from opinion to fact.
Mm-hmm.
Some of us have transitioned into the woe phase of, am I really okay with how these technologies provide information? Am I okay with the fact that they're being used to create much of the media that we see on Facebook? We scripting information on some of the most influential news channels on the planet, conceptually reframing everything we hear and see in new and unique ways. Um, Policy saying, are we okay with the disruption? Do we
Mm-hmm.
want to facilitate it? Do we want to stand by? So, lots of elements of starting to say, do we really want this? Okay. Um, and then at some point, we're going to get to the point of, there's too much value here to leave behind. And we're
Mm-hmm.
going to step forward and begin to grow this technology. And I think at the end of the day, AI is impactful, as impactful in society as electricity. It's just going to unfold a little slower than the revolution of electricity itself. Unfold over decades versus a quite more narrower time. But it's bigger than the personal computer. It's bigger than the smartphone. It really is transformational. How that unfolds, first begins really requiring us to do a whole patchwork of how to fit this into our lives, into society as a whole. Where do we want to protect data? Where do we share data?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we're not allowed to move this data from A to B. How do we just fix this little regulation to allow us to? But the bigger picture is really strategic. It's really thinking about growing this technology under a framework of strategy and think, okay, where do we want this to be, and how do we reframe the strategic operating framework in which this technology can evolve, hopefully with us. And I am a firm believer that the fusion of human expertise with machine intelligence is what's going to get us to where we want to go. The more we automate and we ignore the edge cases and the complexities of where humans can help these systems, the more I think we were moving down a pathway that's probably going to be a little less productive over the long haul. I think when we fast forward 100 years from now, the amount of AI and automation in our lives is going to be, almost inconceivable to life as we know it today. But human expertise is going to be a critical component in lots of complex systems.
I don't know much about the technology other than typing in, please refine this letter for me. Does AI have algorithms so it keeps on building on itself and keeps on learning from itself?
So, Michael, I think when you step back and say, what is AI? AI is a tool set. And in today's society, we look at large language models embodied as chatbots as an illustration of what AI is, and it's not. It's just one of the tools in that tool set. AI is a much broader area, a larger set of tools than what we see in chatbots. But if we talk about chatbots in particular, whether that's Gemini, Copilot, or ChatGTP, you're talking about a set of tools that do have the ability to remember.
Mm.
And you can switch on and off that hysteresis so they can begin to remember things that you did 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, and refine what they're doing based upon learning more about you and your experiences. Now you can wipe some of that memory or maybe all that memory and start over. But at the end of the day, much like browsers had cookies, um, you know, chatbots here have the ability to remember where you've been, what you've done, and refine based upon your persona or your voice in new and unique ways. So when you say refine a letter, the more specificity you give it, the better it's going to do in refining that. But if you provide a template of, hey, then you can say refine this letter as I've done the last 5 or 6, or create a project that creates media stories following a persona and voice of you.
Hmm.
So I for one use AI as a grammar check on steroids constantly. It's a great way of taking a rough draft of something and perfecting it and then iterating from that. Not every edit is something I'm comfortable with, but it
Hmm.
begins to learn my voice and providing suggestions that correlate with how I want to be heard to the outside community, because it's looking at, okay, how do I edit the edits back and forth again?
One of the issues that has come up, and we'll get into how this is going to impact business and leadership. One of the issues that has come up is AI a safe environment, or can it be hacked? So if I wanted to put in information about something, how secure is it?
Hey, look, I think that each provider is taking a different cybersecurity approach. They're not vanilla, but in many senses, these are approaches that are building upon where all of our information is in general today. So many of us have data in um, Apple's cloud, Google's cloud, Dropbox, Amazon cloud services. The same data systems are where the back end of these AI algorithms are. So much like those of us who are a little more concerned about security, look at things like two-factor authentication to get into your profile. This stuff is going to keep this protected just about as well as everything else. So although you are training the system with your voice, if a system was hacked into your computer or your cloud storage and took all your documents, it's going to get the same information anyway. So the security issues are important, but controllable as in anything else. Now, sure, if someone was to hack ChatGTP's fundamental algorithms, could that enable somebody to build from that faster? Absolutely. But I think as we've seen in the iteration of these systems, there are multiple players globally who are doing fairly synergistic things. Yes, A may be leading today, B tomorrow, C the year after, but who knows what's next. So
Yeah.
the loss of those algorithms is probably not as substantial as one may worry.
I was doing some checking on a couple of things, and what I noticed in a couple of the AI sites that I went to, that they're saying it's HIPAA compliant, which I don't know if that's a good thing or not. I just don't know.
It's yeah.
But let's talk about AI and its impact on leadership, because one of the things that we talk about in this podcast is specifically the various dimensions of the leadership journey. How do you see this interfacing, if at all, with our ability to lead?
That's a really good question, Mike. I think that it does intersect, and I think that the organizations that have begun to prepare their corporate cultures to normalize AI as a partner, encouraging their teams to be curious, reducing fear in the workplace around the use of these tools, and aligning value around, usefulness of AI, not hype of AI, are already at a competitive advantage. But that requires unlearning a little of history of how we used to do things, relearning a little bit about AI, which often in many organizations requires one to reflect on how much do we know about our processes and where we can shift and augment our processes. Process control and process enhancement is critical here. If you don't know what you're doing, AI is not going to help you figure it out so easily.
Yeah.
So when we look to optimize a process, I come from an industrial engineering background. Process optimization is huge. When you come to optimize a process, if you don't know the process and really understand the process you're trying to optimize, you're not going to get the outcome you're looking for no matter what. So we
Yeah.
look, many organizations are looking at AI as a savior, not likely to be. Others are really trying to embrace how do you culturally shift to using electronic tools where we may have had to use a little more of the human capital in the past. Really focused on augmenting their workforce versus replacing it. If the element of your team is worried about being laid off at the expense of AI, they're not going to perform so well. If they're
Mhm.
looking at your use of AI in an organization to enhance their productivity, make them better employees, make them stronger contributors, they're likely to build on that and accelerate from that. Now, it may change your hiring strategy a little bit long term,
Mhm.
but we got to really think about augmenting our teams and building them forward using that human capital more strategically.
Yeah. So one of the questions I have is the old adage of, people are afraid of change. I don't think that that's really true. I think people are afraid of being changed. And there's
Yeah.
a whole identity piece, right, that goes along with this. Now, if I am going to, as let's say, a CEO of an organization, I'm going to implement um, partnering with AI with my teams, my leads, and the leads fall into the camp of it's going to take over my job, and I don't trust this thing, and I don't want to change. I want to do things the way they've always been. What responsibility does leadership have, or how can they change that dynamic in the workforce? That's a real tough nut.
Yeah, it is, but it comes from true leadership. I think true leadership is going to encourage their teams to play in a safe, low risk sandbox or environment where teams feel at liberty to leverage tools, experiment with them, and grow naturally. Force fitting doesn't effectively work as effectively.
Yeah.
So, recognizing that these tools can be an amplifier effect to my organization and encouraging their use, again, reasonably and strategically, blending the machine intelligence and human strength can work effectively. But it comes to corporate culture, and that corporate culture, from the top, rewarding teams for learning, creating, and sharing. The old adage of we've always been doing it this way and we need to continue doing this way doesn't really lend it to the improvements we're looking for and the change management.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're not changing, you're not growing, you're going to be left behind for sure.
Exactly.
I was at a company the other day where uh, one of the senior scientists, it's a biopharma company, one of the senior scientists and I were talking, and he said that he entered some parameters around a project that he was doing to get some background information. He said the whole thing just popped up and, saved me hours and hours of research. And
Yeah.
then he spoke about the merits of AI. So, when we partner with that, we can see some amazing results.
And Michael, I think what's really important is that users begin to completely embrace that AI, as it's embodied in chatbots, which we're really talking about here, just provides us with incredible opinions. Now,
Yeah.
those opinions may actually be better than you or I can provide because our limitations on how much we can remember. The brain's wonderful, but it's not perfect. We hallucinate. Why wouldn't you expect the AI to hallucinate? I mean, it's in essence trained on data we produced.
Yeah.
But when you begin to get a starting point, so great, create me a literature review on XYZ, and it is assembling maybe 80%, maybe 70%, maybe 90% of the information you need instantly and giving you the ability to spend a portion of time refining, honing that, and identifying the gaps as opposed to starting the old-fashioned way on a blank sheet of paper. That helps a lot of people.
Yeah. Sure
Others,
does.
on the other hand, need to learn by doing, start,
Mhm.
and end up, because we're not perfect either, creating 60% of it. And then, AI can help you fill in pieces of the other 40 you haven't filled.
Yeah.
And I think it's that iteration between the two. Neither side is perfect. We're all, the machine intelligence provides an opinion, we provide an opinion, and quite frankly, for a better product, we can often fuse those together to provide a whole lot more value with less resources. Now, how do we use those amplified resources? Do we all sit and drink more coffee, sip more wine, go out for dinner, or do we begin to use those resources for creativity purposes that help society in different ways, balance well-being with the workplace? Lots of different pieces. So what is the economy of all this new time, and how do we invest that? Many would say just work more. More
Yeah.
effectively.
Yeah.
Spend your 40 hours being more effective. Great. Or do we say that this concept of a 35-hour week is not necessarily out of reason? Again, I don't have these answers, but this is, as we talked about in that growth side, this is the strategic side of how we use this long term. Do
Yeah.
we use it just to do, to continue to beat that horse and work more and more and more, or do we use it to free some time for what we hope is the purpose of life? Doing
Yeah.
things that we enjoy.
Yeah.
So I,
Exactly.
for one, would love to see AI become such a great assistant that it makes the concept of living with a 35-hour work week being realistic. I can be
Hmm.
even more productive than I ever were, but I can have a little more time to do the things I want to do, spend time with my kids, spend time with my partner, spend time with family, go on an extra vacation every couple of years, etc. You know,
Yeah. There's, something that you said that just triggered in me. There, in some circles, tends to be uh, chastising is too strong of a word, but you understand the concept when I use AI. So if I uh, put into a letter AI verbiage, and people say, "Oh, he used AI," he's not a creative thinker or something like that. What's your response to that? I know the school, right? But
So look, I put a piece out late last year around work slop. I don't think using AI to create material and just tossing that material out without editing and reviewing it as a human makes sense.
okay.
Why? Because the AI does hallucinate. It means the foundations here aren't necessarily something that I would agree and want to sign my name to.
Hmm.
But if the core components are human created and there's a few lines of AI generated information in there that I'm comfortable with, okay, it's co-created. No different than I co-created something with a communications team 5 years ago. It wasn't all my words. It was my words edited by a communications team thrown back at me. This is just an electronics communications team.
Hmm. Hmm.
So my hard part is when the communications team writes a technical document that they didn't understand and throws it out with an executive's name on it, and that's work slop.
Yep.
Modern, just doing it with electronics completely.
So, what I'm hearing you say is that if you generate something like a letter that could clean up the English and be a little bit more professional, it might be important to give it your own voice and
Yes.
go in there and take a look at the words. So it doesn't seem so septic, I guess is the word, or so you know.
Look, if we
Hopefully,
had look, if you can pick a major communications firm out there, every client they're working with, they're trying to manage the voice of that client.
hmm.
If they had a vanilla voice, we wouldn't be going there.
Yeah, yeah,
So
okay.
okay, now you have that communications firm at your fingertips, why would we want all that vanilla voice? And this
Yeah.
is where we have to learn, to grow with these technologies. So one of the big questions in the book is, will we let AI change us? And that's a big one. We as humans need to evolve. We need to accept that technology is going to shift the playing field a little bit. And how much do we want to evolve, and how much do we want to do things the old-fashioned way? I go
Yeah.
back to some of my roots in driving. Do you really want cars without power steering anymore?
It's a great analogy, and like you said, there's this yin and yang that has developed right now around AI. Any final thoughts before we begin to kind of wrap this up on AI
Yeah,
and this? And
Yeah, I think we need to be thinking about guardrails and how we use this and how it continues to evolve. And I think the algorithms that we look at today is advanced, won't be a few years from now. A question of what is AI, and in some views, it's what's next versus what's yesterday. But there is an evolving set of tools that are going to increasingly allow machines to become better collaborators, better producers. And I hope that we embrace the collaboration side, because I think that the more we as humans learn to work effectively with machines and technology, the more we can really amplify the human experience versus automate it away. And by golly, there's a lot to being human that's to be proud of and to try to amplify. So I hope we begin to really think more about how do we balance in the human equation. We enhance society, we enhance our experiences, we enhance our ability to do things. And we use this newfound time to do a little more of what we've all wanted to do all along, but not so much that we lose the core capacities of what we are as humans, the capacity to work, the capacity to create, the capacity to do new things. And we find a new balancing point, and technology allows us to find a new balance.
thank you. I appreciate those words. Thank you for, just a fascinating conversation, and one that is so timely because as this stuff is now breaking through Hasbro through and is now expanding, people are wondering about it. And this has provided a lot of clarification, and I appreciate that. The book, How to Make AI Useful, Moving Beyond the Hype to Real Progress in Business, Society, and Life, a must read. I think it's one of my top books that I've read over the past year, and I mean that in all sincerity. Is wonderful. Bryan, I really want to thank you for being on the show. I appreciate your thoughts and insights into this fascinating world.
Michael, really appreciate the invitation, and the insightful conversation here, and the help getting the message out.